Hey, my car is successful on a prep track. I'm gonna put some small tires on it. I'm gonna go out to these no prep events or the back of the track events, and I'm gonna kick butt. Hey, welcome back to Kevin Wilson SBC. It has been a while since I posted some content. I'm happy to say my dad is doing much better. We are making progress with his health and things are improving for him slowly, but he's back at the shop. He's back able to do some work, and I really appreciate the continued support and patience as we have taken some time to get back out and putting content out. Today I want to start into the no prep drag racing series suspension setup. This is going to be a multi-part series. There's no way I'm going to be able to cover everything in one video. But let's take a second, let's jump into no prep drag racing, and let's go over some basic principles in this video that will lay the foundation for the rest of this series. Please take a minute to subscribe to the channel. Please hit the thumbs up button, hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching Kevin Wilson SBC. No prep drag racing. So many racers feel like because their car works so well on a prep track that they can just put some small tires on it if it's a big tire car, if it's already a small tire car. They feel like they're just going to pull some timing out of the car and they're going to be able to just go out and get down the track with the same suspension setups they've used at the track. Obviously, I believe that's false. And I believe most of the no prep community understands that. If you're at a track and it's got a strong prep on it, it's a very different suspension setup than going out on the street. I can remember back in the day, as long as I can remember back, I can remember going out with my dad in his 67 Dodge Coronet RT, 440, 4-speed, Dana rear end, and I can remember Dad doing a bunch of work on that car. He built his own traction bars back then. He did a lot. He took the 3.2s off, put a 4-barrel on, put the 3.2s back on, changed the clutch. And I can just remember Dad going out with that car, and that car would just work on the street so well back then. But you know, back then in the early 70s, the power was very different than we have available to us today. I've said this in many of my other videos. You can take a car today and have 1,000 to 1,500 horsepower easily. There are cars riding around on the street that can go through drive-through windows, go up and down the streets, stoplights, traffic, everything, no problems. And with a few knobs turned, go to the track and put down 1,200 horsepower and then drive home. That's very different than the early 70s, late 60s and early 70s and mid 70s that I grew up in. And with the power available today, there are some amazing factory cars that can go out and be very successful. With that said, there are certain things around no prep drag racing that you just have to take into account. First of all, there are no magic settings that I can make a video on that will just cover every scenario. Every car is so unique. The combination of each car is so critical. It's going to take a combination of the suspension setup you have, the shocks you have, what kind of valving do you have in those shocks, how much power are you capable of putting down, what's the surface condition? Is it a no prep track like a no prep Kings? Is it a back of the track where it's extremely horrible and you might as well just be on some fresh road somewhere that's rocks and dust and dirt in it? What are the skills of the driver? You know, so many times we forget about the skills of the person behind the seat. I'm going to give a huge shout out here to a channel that I watch a lot of, and I'm really involved in following this channel, and that's the Street Racing channel and the SRC Garage channel. You know, you got the Street Racing channel and you got Billy's dad on SRC Garage. These guys are down to earth, fundamental, hardcore drag racers, street racers that understand all of this. If you watch some of the newer series with Tommy and the Falcon, which that Falcon is bad to the bone. That Falcon is bad to the bone. You hear people talking about, well, it's been a while since Tommy's raced, maybe they ought to put him in the beginner class or whatever. But Tommy's no rookie. Tommy's had seat time. And the reason why all that came up, and it's just not a matter of going out there, pressing a button down, putting it to the floor, and letting go of the button and just steering. There's a lot more involved with driving skills, understanding your car, knowing how your car feels, knowing when you feel wheel speed, how's your car going to react, knowing when to lift, knowing how to correct, knowing when to hit the scramble, knowing how to launch the car and how to tune the car. These are things that you just cannot underestimate with no prep racing. You've got to know your setup. Now, having said that, I'm going to try to cover some common suspensions throughout the series of this video. But the suspension is just one small part of the recipe. The entire combination of everything I just talked about is so critical. And there are no magic settings that I can give in a video that will cover this for everybody. For this video to make sense, I gotta talk at high levels based on certain suspension setups. And I'm going to attempt to do that in this series. The next thing I wanna talk about right now is power management. This is absolutely critical. If you do not have a way to control the amount of power you're putting down in a no prep race, you're going to be at a large deficit to most or 90% of the field. You've got to have a way to hit the suspension, pull power, and bring that power back in based on the surface, based on your setup. You've got to have some type of a way to do that. What are some ways to do that? Well, one of the biggest ways to do that is controlling the amount of boost with the amount of timing that you have in the car on the hit. That first 60 to 100 feet, I would say from starting line to mid-track, if you start getting too much wheel speed in your no prep car, you're in trouble. If you can't control the amount of wheel speed you're putting down based on your suspension, your shock, your skills, your weight bias, everything else around how your car is reacting, you're going to be in trouble. Now, having said that, you may have picked up on a key part of power management. Let's talk about a 4-link car. You have to hit the rear end to some degree. You have to apply some type of a hit to get the physics working on the rear end. Now, when I say that, I'm talking like the first half second when you let go of the button or when you mat the throttle, there has to be some type of a shock to the suspension. But almost immediately after you hit the suspension, you're pulling power to not overrun the slicks. All right, pause. If you're no prep racing with radials, more power to you. But you really, I'm talking slicks in no prep racing for this video series. Unless you're in a hard tire class that requires radials, if the class you're racing in allows slicks, you need to be running slicks for no prep racing. Just wanted to settle that. But that power management, being able to shock the suspension, load the suspension, then pull that power to control wheel speed is absolutely critical. Like I said, boost or timing, and both ideally. The 48 Ford, it's got a root style blower on it. I really don't have a way to control the amount of boost that bad boy is making. It's based on RPMs, how fast I'm spinning that blower, depends on how much boost it's making. The only thing I could do with the 48 Ford in a no prep event is how much timing I'm pulling and the timing curve that I'm putting down with that car. Weight bias. This is so critical. The weight bias, and what I mean is how much weight's on the front, how much weight's on the rear. And I'm talking static weight. There's lots of discussions around dynamic weight transfer versus static weight transfer. Hey, I'm going to tell you right now, I am an absolute believer in scales. Scaling a race car is absolutely critical in getting your baseline and understand what's happening. Do the scales tell you what's happening when the car is going down the track? Absolutely not. However, they tell me how the car is sitting at rest before I apply power. And with video and multiple angles of video and data logging and understanding how my static weight bias is set, especially the left and right corner weights, I can make a lot of educated decisions based on static weight bias. The minute you hit the throttle, the minute that car begins to leave, those static weights are gone. I'm not going to say gone, but they're acting differently on each corner of the car under load. When the car leaves, the transfer of energy changes the weights on all four corners. And that change of weight can definitely and will definitely determine how your car leaves. What do I mean by that? Weight transfer. We cannot ignore how weight is transferred around your car on the hit and as your car is going down the track. The weight bias and the weight transfer are the keys to understanding, and all of these really, power management, weight bias, weight transfer, and the suspension setup, and we're going to talk about those magic settings here soon. But getting the weight transferred correctly to the drive wheels, which in my instance, I'm talking about the rear wheels, the rear slicks of a no prep car. I have really no experience with four-wheel drive cars. I generally have never worked on front-wheel drive drag race cars, so I have no experience from which to speak on all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive cars. This weight transfer, we're going to spend some time talking about weight transfer, and depending on the surface, depending on all the things we've talked about already, the whole recipe of your car, then we need to get the proper amount of weight over the rear slicks and maintain that weight throughout the run to ensure we have as little to no wheel speed as possible for no prep back of the track racing. Wheel speed is going to be your enemy if it gets out of control. There will be times where wheel speed will come into play and some spinning, some controlled spinning will come into play. I've talked about in some of my other videos with the 48 Ford. That car is a terrible, terrible example of a no prep car. Why do I say that? The weight bias on the 48 Ford, there is 58% of the weight is on the front end of the 48 Ford. The only advantage I have with that much weight on the front end at no prep is that my weight is high. The center of gravity on the 48 Ford, though it is very far forward, it is very high up in the car. Whenever we built the 48 Ford, you got to remember now, it's the Ford is sitting on a G-body chassis that we back-halved. And we intentionally raised the center of gravity on the car. We put the small block Chevrolet up high in the car on purpose to protect the oil pan on hard nose-down events. We did not want the oil pan to be able to get hit on the surface of the track or the street. Because of that, and now that we've added the Roots blower, the Roots blower setup is extremely heavy, and all that weight is on top of the motor, on top from the intake up. My center of gravity in the 48 Ford is high. So even though the front end is so heavy, because the weight is so high in the chassis, it does transfer very well. I actually have some very old video footage when Dad was driving the 48 around the block on Rivers Avenue before we were street legal or anything. just running that thing with a small block Chevy 350 with high compression on race fuel with a carburetor. And the weight transfer on that thing was absolutely amazing. Because the weight was high up. So that's a pretty key point that we're going to talk about later in this series, is the height of your center of gravity. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about the distance from the midplate to the rear end center line. And the shorter you can make that distance, the better your weight bias and weight transfer is going to be. I keep saying bias. It's weight bias. The shorter the distance from the midplate to the rear end, then the shorter the drive shaft, and all you're doing is moving the motor weight further back. Where the driver sits, where you place the driver's seat, is critical in weight bias and weight transfer. Where do you put the battery? In the 48 Ford, we have a 16-volt battery, glass mat filled from rock batteries. It's over the rear end, but we moved it to the passenger side of the rear end. We have a rear mount radiator on the 48 Ford, and we've got it centered in the rear of the 48 Ford behind the center line of the rear end axle. These all play a part into the four corner weights, and these two things right here, and how you can control your power based on these pieces, are very critical to no prep racing. Hey, I get that was a long segment to cover, but these are fundamental principles to this series. As I go throughout this series, I'm going to use the 48 Ford as an example. If I were to try to street race, no prep race, back of the track race, whatever you want to call it, the 48 Ford, I'm going to use that as an example about some of the changes I would make on the car with regard to everything we've talked about here. I will also refer to the Street Racing channel or SRC Garage for other things, because you have two very good examples on those channels. You have a leaf spring setup with cow tracks, and now with the Falcon you have a triangulated 4-link rear suspension setup as well. In my opinion, that triangulated rear 4-link system is absolutely amazing. There's a reason why so many people race Mustangs. You go to any track in the world today, you will see Mustang after Mustang after Mustang after Mustang. Why? Because the strut front end, the triangulated rear 4-link works. Absolutely, it works. And as you begin to learn how to tune both of those components together, along with power management, along with your shock settings and your shock valvings, you have the recipe for a very strong no prep car, hands down. So as we go through this series, that's how I'm going to approach it. There are many other YouTube channels out there that you can go look at street racing and no prep racing and learn a lot from those guys. These channels aren't going to spoon feed you everything. These channels work very hard to further their racing program, and they're not going to share every setting with you. And just because they may run this many clicks of compression or this many clicks of rebound doesn't mean you need to run the same clicks. You have to learn your car. You have to watch videos of your car. You have to data log your car, and you have to start building the recipe. You make a run and you study the data log, you study the video, then you tweak the recipe. It's like cooking. You change things as you go, you taste, and then you make changes, you taste, you make changes. You have to be willing to put in the time to no prep race. The same goes with track racing. It takes time to dial a car in, whether it's prep or no prep. Back of the track, street, it takes time to learn your car. These are important fundamentals that I will constantly come back to in this video series. I hope this will lay the foundation as we go forward in what we're going to talk about for no prep drag racing. Hopefully this has made sense, and hopefully you will stay tuned as we walk through the series. We're going to have a series of videos specifically for front end settings. We're going to have a video specifically for rear settings. Then we're going to have a video that ties all this together with how you can put those settings to use based on the surface. I'm not going to get so hung up on whether you're more than 100% anti-squat or less than 100% anti-squat. Let's clear that up right now. In no prep racing, think about this. Do you want to shove the slick to the track or the surface, or are you trying to pull the slick up into the fender well? I don't know about you, but I'm going to be trying to plant the slick to the surface. Just because you have rear end separation and what we call more than 100% anti-squat doesn't mean you're not going to have weight transfer. So many people confuse the anti-squat line. And we're going to debunk some anti-squat line myths. Yes, I have many videos that talk about the anti-squat line. But that anti-squat line is a point of reference for your car. It gives you a place to start. It doesn't solve all suspension problems. I have so many emails on, Kevin, should I be running 130% anti-squat or 150% anti-squat, or should I be at an 80% anti-squat? I can't answer that. There are so many factors that come into play for your car. We have to understand your car. The anti-squat line is just a reference from which you can start at a known place, look at your videos, look at your data log, and then make an educated change for your car. Hey, thank you for watching. I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. But I will be releasing more videos throughout this week as we get into the details that I want you to consider for no prep racing. Thank you for all of your support of the channel. Thank you for all the prayers that have been sent for my dad. And just remember, we're trying to do three things. We're trying to go fast, we're trying to go straight, and definitely we're trying to be safe.